He had never in his life sung as now. In the duet of the second act, which is called the seduction duet, he was swept off his feet by the heavenly music and the heavenly voices. As the last melting note died away, he seized Philippa's hands, drew her towards him, and kissed her solemnly, as a bridegroom might kiss his bride before the altar. Then he let her go, for the moment was too sublime for any further word or movement. Mozart himself was looking down on the two. So, you remember I told you how the apartment viewing had been canceled? I was mistaken. I was confusing two different texts. So, 20 minutes ago, a young Venezuelan migrant family arrived at my door. And so I was planning on watching a few more scenes
you're oh, come in. I'm just watching Danish foreign films.
Yes. Yes. Do you want to sit down? You want to sit down and watch Babette's Feast in Danish with English subtitles?
I'm really trying to hit the wildly eccentric landlord thing.
I'm not quite there, but with a little bit of work, I probably could get there.
We could all be again someday.
I will get good and grumpy on Twitter sometimes and be like, "Why do people pick up the phone and tell me they can't talk?"
Get off my lawn.
Exactly. I have a certain
is Babette's Feast image for you in that particular moment. Somebody picking up the phone while your visage and the flames of hell are superimposed together, and that person kind of picks up the phone and says I can't talk, and that is the image of hell for you.
I don't feel as though that it's quite at that level of hell. I just don't understand why somebody would bother picking up their phone to tell me they can't talk right now when they could just let it go to voicemail. And I still actually maybe am wildly old fashioned and will leave you a voicemail and expect that you will listen to it and maybe roughly within 24 to 48 hours respond to me. To me, that is the convention that makes the most sense since it's the one I grew up with, and that feels perfectly normal. I still remember my father's tape answering machine message. Hello, this is Frank Dukes speaking on the answering machine. I can't take your call right now, but if you leave your name, your number, and a brief message, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And then you leave it, and then you get home from work, and you hit play, and the tape rewinds, and it plays all your messages, and you write them down on a piece of paper, and then when convenient, you call those people back, as God intended.
We kill each other as God intended. Sportsmanlike.
Do you want to...
Yeah, we're going to start with... we're going to give you guys a quick rundown of... what happens in this?
Oh, and maybe we should say in a more sort of formal way that today we are discussing the first of our Foodie films. It is Axel Gabriel's 1987. I think I have that right? Yep, 1987 correct. Film Babette's Feast. And where does it begin, Chris Bagg?
It begins and ends
True.
A village in Denmark by the sea. We are introduced to our two... I don't even know if they're main characters. There's so much about this movie that is not standard.
This movie is very hard. It's very hard to define certain aspects of it. It is tugging at me in various ways. But they are two major characters. That's for sure.
Yeah,
whether you call them protagonists or not, I don't think they are protagonists.
Yeah, that's one of my questions for later. Who is the protagonist? Who is the antagonist, if there are any? But we learned that they are no longer in the first flush of youth, right. Is the description that we get through a narrator. We hear that they do a lot of charity for the people in their village, which is basically a religious sect. It was founded by their father, who is now deceased, and seems to be some flavor of Protestantism, I think.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
They're named Martina and Philippa after Martin Luther and his best friend, Philip.
Got it.
But they're dressed like Puritans. But
Yeah.
so they are very Protestant, and they are. I'm not sure exactly what sect, but they're quite Protestant.
Time gets a real sort of like loosey-goosey treatment in here. We jump around a fair bit. We kind of begin, as far as I can tell, there's 3 time signatures. There is the recent past, there's the distant past, and then most of the action in the second half of the movie takes place in the present, which is about 14 years after where we begin. Right. But we get quickly a flashback to the sisters are young. They have 2 potential paramours that don't work out. Martine and a young officer named Lawrence, and Philippa and an opera singer, Ashley Pepin. Both of those don't work out. They are sent away mostly because the father is not cruel or controlling, but is really focused on having his daughters there so he can continue to run this sect of this sort of puritanical, though when I say puritanical, it sounds, really kind of awful. But it's just a strict-ish.
They're strict. They're not.
Religion.
They're not. I don't see them as. It's a really interesting question about how oppressed. I think one of the questions of this film is this community a kind of oppressed patriarchal community, or is it a community of people who are choosing to live very simply, and to eschew certain pleasures. One thing I'll say is that I don't really think the father sends them away. Lawrence, the officer, finds himself kind of tongue-tied and kind of leaves out of his own sense of embarrassment, I think. And Philippa's potential paramour, Achille Papin, who is a brilliant opera singer and a bit older, there's a moment where he is a bit too forward in a lesson that makes her uncomfortable. Now, why it makes her uncomfortable, I think, is an interesting question that I will raise later as well. But he is teaching her, because she has a beautiful singing voice, to be an opera singer. And she's going along with that at first, but she becomes uncomfortable and asks her father to send him away.
And her father is quite satisfied.
He is very happy with that outcome.
Yeah, that's a positive outcome.
But it did come from Philippa. It did not come from the father.
Correct, yes. I'll be interested to talk about that later.
I actually have a reading from the original story queued of that moment, too.
Got it.
So.
Nice. They get to be middle-aged, or we return to the more recent past, and we learn that we get our title character, Babette, shows up. She is a friend of the opera singer Pepin. She has been forced to flee France as part of the French Revolution. No.
It's
the French Revolution.
Whatever the conflagration of 1871 was that led to the Paris.
Wait a second, French Revolution is
100 years after.
Not 1879.
I read a little bit about it because I was curious about the same thing, and it all came about after a particularly embarrassing defeat by Napoleon III, and then there was a kind of proletariat takeover of Paris. But it's not really explained in the movie.
The sisters at first say that they can't afford to hire anyone, and she agrees to cook and clean for free. And I'll kick it back over to you.
Sure. Years go by. You see some of this. You see Babette becoming more kind of accepted in the village. You see the quality of the food that the sisters eat vastly improve from a kind of terrible boiled fish stew.
And bread soup.
And bread soup that has it has roughly the texture of baby feces.
Yeah.
And doesn't appear to taste much better. She becomes, you see her learn Danish and sort of she starts, bargaining, driving a hard bargain with the fishmongers and sourcing the ingredients. And she kind of comes into her own. Everybody likes her. The sisters are very they say at something like, thank you God for sending us Babette. There's an interesting moment where they note that they're saving a little bit more money now, perhaps because Babette is helping out around the house or something. We don't
She's
quite
got
know
great culinary math.
Yeah. Yeah, she's saving them money, right? Exactly. And 14 years go by, and the other thing that happens is the villagers, the father dies, the sort of patriarch of the religion, and in his absence, the villagers get kind of increasingly bitter in their old age, and the two sisters sort of try to remind them that their father always wanted everybody to get along and love one another, and they all just start complaining about kind of old jealousies and business deals gone awry and things like that, and they're getting increasingly cranky and hardened. And then Babette wins the lottery. We've heard that she has one friend in Paris who buys her one lottery ticket a month or something like that.
It's great.
And it hits, and she wins 10,000 francs, which is probably like $1 million or something like that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's money anyway. And so apparently she's going to leave, and the sisters are quite sad, but they're I would say fundamentally decent. They're not going to try to cheat her of that money or steal it. It's hers. And they're prepared for her to leave. And she says, well, before I go, I want you to grant me one favor. I would like to cook a proper French dinner for you for your father's birthday and all of his disciples. And at first they're reluctant. But then she says, have I ever asked you for anything at all, ever? And they're like, that's a good point. She really hasn't. So they agree.
Except for asking to work for free.
Except for asking to work for free.
I was like, wait.
That's the only other request.
You have asked for something before, in fact.
Sort of. But since then, not much. And you can tell that that they are grateful to have her around.
Yeah.
She definitely enriches their household, even though she is, one senses, stifling some of her French culture and personality in order to fit into this very severe, plain, strict village. So they agree, and the sisters are reluctant. And I'll let you take it from there.
Babette makes the dinner. The group of villagers eat it. At first, they all call a meeting because Martine is very worried that they are going to come to this dinner and basically consign themselves to the fires of hell.
Well, and she's seeing some of the preparations, which are rather elaborate. Probably no dinner with this elaborate preparation has ever happened at this village before.
Yeah, we're in Jutland, which is a part of Denmark with a very strong literary tradition. It shows up in Hamlet. It shows up in a bunch of different places, and it's very often it shows up in Beowulf. It is Jutland is always kind of held up as the place where the yokels live.
Interesting.
Like, it's never depicted in literature as like a nice place.
Right.
And yes, this like fantastic French meal is being prepared there. Martine sees a live turtle in the kitchen, a cow's head. I mean, all sorts of very over-the-top things. And she's really worried about what this means in a society that is ostensibly oriented towards austerity. And the villagers, out of respect for Martine, say, we're going to eat the meal. We are not going to offend Babette. We are not going to offend our hosts. We're not going to say anything about the food at all.
Right.
And so they sort of agree to go along with it. Martine is happy about that. The day approaches. The meal comes. The villagers eat the meal, which is fantastic.
There's one important guest.
The General,
guest.
Lawrence. Right. Yes, Lawrence has returned. As he's arriving, we get to see this. He's getting dressed to go to this dinner. And he has a kind of meditation on his life where he says that most of what he has done has been for vanity's sake. And in a really brilliant moment, he even talks with his younger self, saying, I've achieved everything that you set out to achieve. And I find it somewhat... I'm concerned that maybe everything I've done has been for vanity's sake only. And he's kind of going to this dinner knowing that he's going to get to see this love of his from his youth again. and maybe get a sense that not everything was for naught. He's really holding this dinner up as a test of the world and its fairnesses and or unfairnesses to him.
Right.
Babette
in a way, it seems like he's hoping it will not be a good time so as to validate his choice to essentially leave Martine. And I mean, that was the sense I got, that he was actually sort of like, this is my chance to realize that I did, in fact, make the right decision, leaving her behind and focusing on my career.
And I think we'll talk about this later. He is both proved wrong and proved right through this sort of amazing setup of circumstance in which Babette does cook this absolutely incredible meal. The general talks about another incredible meal that he has had in Paris at the Café Anglais, one of the premier establishments in all of Paris that was run by, or that the kitchen was run by a female chef, which in the 1860s would have been incredibly unusual. And we're beginning to, suspect that maybe Babette is that particular chef by this point in the movie. And we get to see the general's experience of the dinner conflated with the experience of the villagers. And everybody loves the dinner. It is great. But the villagers are kind of given permission to love the dinner by the general's enjoyment of it. And we slowly begin to see that, in fact, this dinner is truly over the top and truly incredible. Martine and Laurens get one final interaction. Laurens confesses his love that he has felt his entire life for her, and she says the same. But he says that the body is foolish, and so they will be married in spirit, essentially, for the rest of their existences. And he gets in a sleigh and departs.
And the disciples, the villagers, are once again reminded of their kindness, love, and regard for one another. And through this pleasurable experience that they have feared, are actually reminded of the kind of, brotherhood is not quite the right word because they're women, humanity. But the shared humanity they have with the other villagers. And there's a moment when they kind of stagger out in their kind of food hangover outside, and the stars are beautiful, and they join arms and they sing around the well. And they have not had that much happiness in each other's company probably since the old man died, and maybe not even prior to, perhaps ever.
Yes,
it is still rather chaste. Nobody has become a hedonist because of this dinner, and in a way, it is almost as though the dinner has helped them rediscover the joy of their rather austere existence, as opposed to simply feeling sort of oppressed, bitter, and strict about it.
Yeah, they are of a religious sect that looks to the afterlife as the proof of their existence. And they experience in this dinner a moment of mundane joy, of non-divine joy, of joys of the flesh, but not, as I think they suspected, sinful joys.
Right. And I guess the one other thing is that then Babette reveals, the sisters come, they congratulate Babette, and they say, we're really going to miss you. And Babette says, I'm not going back to Paris, and I don't have any money because I spent it all on the dinner. And yes, I was the chef at Café Anglais, where dinners often cost 10,000 francs.
Dinner for 12 is 10,000 francs.
Right. And so she spent all of her fortune. So one assumes she's just going to continue to live as the maid to the sisters for the rest of their lives and her lives. Perhaps maybe one might hope that she is allowed to express her, French cuisine heritage in the future. That perhaps she's earned a little bit more creativity in her cooking. But Who knows? Maybe not. I mean, she certainly doesn't have any money to order turtles. We've kind of alluded at this, but my first question for you is, what do you think the filmmaker's tone is with this is a Chris Bagg question, with regard to the sisters and the villagers and the disciples?
So the one thing that I'm coming away from this movie is the gentleness and the kind of sophistication of how it conveys what it's trying to do. Mm-hmm. This is a movie where, I mean, just in our roundup, like your little line here, Babette cooks the meal, the villagers eat it. Fiend.
It was a bit of a joke because it's the final third of the movie.
Totally,
right?
Yeah, but like I understand why you're making that joke. This movie, if you showed this to somebody, I don't know, anyone under 20, to our teenage listeners out there, I apologize. I'm not. I don't mean to be reductive of your experience.
Anybody under 25,
get off my yard. We need like a recorded "get off my yard."
I was thinking about I could imagine. I was like, what Marvel character could exist in this? And I was imagining like Wolverine having like a 15-year sojourn in this Jutland village, chopping wood and like kind of being a servant, before like Professor Xavier shows up and is like, "We need you again,"
I kind of think Fat Thor would love it here.
Fab Four?
Fat Thor.
Oh, Fat Thor.
Yeah.
Does he get fat?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a great scine where he kind of gives up and moves to a fishing village and gets fat.
Didn't see that. I haven't, I have only watched so many. But so continue with your thought. Are you getting to tone or are you going somewhere else?
I'm getting to tone. But yeah, I mean, like the reason I'm talking about people under 20 is I think that unless you have like a wildly difficult experience growing up, I don't think this movie's kind of sophistication is really going to land for you in any way, because this movie to me is really about the beliefs that you hold that eventually can eventually hold you back rather than helping you exist in the world, which is what belief systems are supposed to do. Like they are supposed to help you make sense of all of this, which really is too much for for people to really understand. And I think the tone of voice of the movie is gentle, but I think that it is not mocking, but it's not mocking. Mm-hmm. I think that we are meant to understand that this way of life, while it does have its upsides in terms of simplicity and austerity and community, perhaps these villagers have taken it too far. And I think that the filmmaker's tone of voice is don't get too strict, don't get too harsh, don't get hedonistic. But you know what? That like the spice of life is variety and difference, and there are joys in this world that are just as wonderful as the promised joys of the next world. And in fact, I think the tone of voice is that the promises of this world are more real than the promises of the next world.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the world thing, but I liked how you put, it's not mocking. Not mocking. I think I agree. I think it is a movie about the dangers of excessive moderation.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah,
there's still there's a dignity in these characters, and I think it ultimately respects that they have chosen the life that they have chosen, and that there is something virtuous, beautiful, and simple about that. But in making that choice, they have slid into an extreme of moderation that required an adjustment of a kind, and essentially it's the adjustment that Babette provides to them.
Yeah. Have you ever seen The Birdcage?
Yes.
So there's a moment in The Birdcage when Nathan Lane's character is attempting to pass as straight. and they dress him up in a suit and teach him to walk like John Wayne. And it works up until the moment that he sits and sort of stiffly crosses his legs, not in a feminine manner, but in a masculine manner, where one puts the ankle on the opposite knee.
Right.
And it is suddenly revealed that he is wearing bright pink socks. And Robin Williams and the main...
It's the guy who plays Apu, Hank Azaria.
No, Hank Azaria is the...
the Guatemalan servant.
Is the servant. I'm trying to remember just sort of the son, the main, like, he's not the main character.
Son. Yeah, I know.
But they're watching this, and they see the pink sock, and there's this moment where they're like,
yeah.
And Nathan Lane says something like, "What? One wants a hint of color." And I feel like that particular moment, that movie is amazing, and La Cage aux Folles is amazing. And what The Birdcage manages to do, especially when it came out, was it really threads the needle from this place of not understanding LGBTQ queer existence and understanding it in a same way that I think that Babette brings to this particular village's place.
Yeah.
Where that she reintroduces a hint of color. She doesn't remake the village. She doesn't like completely upend their way of life, but through her gift and by embiggening their world, she really makes a change in the way that they treat each other, because they have gotten cantankerous and cruel towards each other, and she fixes that.
Mm-hmm. Or at least for the night.
Yeah.
Although I guess the introduction maybe suggests that she has fixed it for a longer time, because the introduction takes place in the present, I think after the dinner or around the time of the dinner, and you see the old people getting fed their soup, nodding happily.
Yeah.
Which suggests that the state of affairs has been made somewhat more pleasurable.
So my question for you is, what genre do you think this movie is?
I'm going to give you a circular answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's all we do.
I mean, in films, this would be it's an easy answer, right? They would just call it a period drama, right? It's a comedy of manners. It is a Merchant Ivory type production. But that's not really genre in the literary sense, which is what kind of story is this? You know, the short story, this was based on a short story by Karen Blixen, a.k.a. Isaac Dennison. I read a little bit of it. And this movie hews very, very closely to the story, as far as I can tell, that Karen Blixen wrote. Karen Blixen's short story collection, in which this story appears, is called Anecdotes of Destiny, which is like, can you imagine naming a short story collection Anecdotes of Destiny?
You would have to really either be fantastically confident or brand new to all this,
or poorly translated.
Yeah,
I don't know, but my answer to your question is this is an anecdote of destiny. It's something like a parable or a myth.
Oh, it's very it is very parabolic.
And I think it's a movie about destiny, and it's a movie about the paths our lives take and whether we make the right choices or not, and what are the implications of those choices, and how do we make sense of those choices, I think. And so I don't know if that's a genre that exists, but I'm going to go ahead and just call it's an anecdote of destiny. It's not quite like a Greek tragedy level of myth, but it is something like a parable. I wouldn't call it an allegory, because the characters are very much themselves. It's not like Babette stands in for sort of like pleasure. You know, you can certainly associate certain qualities with different characters, but the characters in and of themselves are complex, and they have all of the different forces that are kind of very, very, very quietly warring with each other in this movie, exist in all the characters, which is why it's interesting, that the characters experience temptation towards hedonism, and they experience fear, and they experience longing, and they experience desire for something bigger, and they experience contentment in a simple mundane pleasure. So yeah, I'm going to go with Anecdote of Destiny. What's your answer to your own question?
I think this is a comedy.
Well, if you're asking, is it a comedy or a tragedy? That one is very, very, very tough.
Totally. We could go back to the, like, what are the 7 stories? And Rob Harvilla did an episode about this recently.
Yeah.
When he was talking, believe it or not, about the Chick song "Goodbye, Earl." He opens the whole show saying that there are 7 stories, but really there are 8, and the 8th great story of humankind is Con Air. Everybody go listen. It's an amazing monologue. But he does go through and say 2 of them are tragedy and comedy, and says, those seem way too broad for me.
Well, are you using comedy in the sense of a Shakespearean comedy, meaning a happy ending, or are you using comedy in the sense of Hollywood, which means funny things happen?
Both. I think that this functions structurally like a comedy. In the end, we have 2 characters coming together due to the nature of the action. That Lawrence and Martine do get a chance to confess their feelings for each other and have some sort of connection that is going to go forward into the future, even if it's just a spiritual connection. But I think starting right around the moment when Martine begins to suspect that this dinner is going to be more than she and the villagers can handle spiritually. And she calls a meeting and expresses to them in sort of horror what they are all about to be in for, that I begin to think that this is all just this marvelous and still good-natured joke that is being told to us. It's not mean in any way. Like, I really do think that the characters are treated gently and fairly. But watching Martine's face, she even goes to the meeting dressed all in black, and all of the villagers come to the dinner party as if they are headed to a funeral. As Babette is laying the table, there's this incredible moment. She is setting the table. Martine comes and takes down the portrait of their father. And we get the sense that he's put back up somewhere else, right? But not overseeing the dinner.
Yes. Like, she's not going to let him see it.
Yeah. And it was at those particular moments that I was like, oh, this is very funny.
I thought comedy was being used for characterization throughout the entire film. Like, I think Achille Papin, the opera singer, and his very chaste love for Philippa is played sort of comedically in her response to that. Even young Lorenz, his sort of comic, it's visual comedy. He looks ridiculous. Like, his hair is too big for his head. He's too skinny for his outfit. And it also made me think of just how important casting is for film, and when you're doing storytelling, because all of these characters look exactly right. I think they look, and so much of the story is conveyed in how they look and the way they age, but also the way they look as young people. And so I think, and when there's a moment where Lawrence is sort of sitting next to Martine, and she invites him to sit down, and he's smiling, and then he just kind of like has this terrible like burp hiccup thing happening, and he's so embarrassed by that he has to get up and leave, and that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And the one thing that is sort of different about the Karen Blixen story is there's this whole backstory in his family about that involves like witches of the mountains or something, like silencing a man or something. So apparently he has some kind of anxiety around speaking too. But I think comedy is used sort of throughout the film, but it's always very, very quiet. It's never the sort of comedy that makes you laugh out loud, except for probably the greatest moment of that is when the film is trying to draw the particular contrast it's trying to draw in the most strong way, which is Babette's preparation of the sinful feast and Martine and the other villagers' fear of the pleasure that is about to be summoned forth, like a witch summoning, Satan from her cauldron. And literally, she has a cauldron into which she's putting all sorts of grotesque things like a pig's head and chicken's feet and, all sorts of other...
There's some real, visual references to Roman Polanski's Macbeth.
Oh, interesting.
You have this real moment of, and just the superimposition of Martine's face and the flames of hell and the head of the cow and the poor turtle. It really that's one of the reasons why I said if you aren't over 25, this movie is going to strike you, I think, as sort of hopelessly self-interested and precious and boring. Yeah. And I think actually it is hilarious. And it's not totally comic, but I would say that it mostly functions as a comedy.
Well, and I was thinking today about whether in the Shakespearean sense I would call it a comedy or a tragedy. And I think it's either a comedy that is extraordinarily sad, or it's a tragedy with a tremendously joyful silver lining. If our protagonist is Babette, Babette's story is profoundly sad. Mm-hmm. And the ending, she gets her moment, she proves her point, and she gets to once again feel the power and the competency and the joy and the craft of being an artist in the way that she wants to be. Only one more time, and she's 50, and she's going to live another 30 years. And it's very hard for me to say whether this is a sad comedy or a happy tragedy. Yeah. But it is a movie that very much makes me feel joyful at the end of it, because it is very much pointing at what is precious in the mundane of life. And so it feels, whether it's a comedy or a tragedy, it feels very celebratory, even as it's tremendously bleak. So when Babette wins the lottery, I think 10,000 francs is probably $1 million. You could retire on that. I think she could have gone back to Paris, bought a house, had a small sort of, she could have invested the money, lived off the interest for the rest of her life. She might not be able to, go back to Café Anglais and be the head chef, but she could probably cook and reestablish her life. She could probably stay in Denmark and open up a small cafe where she serves French food. Maybe not quite as good as, she might not be able to source all the ingredients the way that she sourced them for the feast. But she could probably get some pretty good ingredients, and do some pretty good. Instead, she chooses to spend her windfall on this one thing.
Yeah.
And what do you think the film is telling us about? To me, I don't really fully understand that choice. To me, it feels like the wrong choice for her, even though I love this movie where we get to see the effects on her and everybody else of that choice. I love it as an aesthetic and narrative choice. But if I were Babette's best friend, I'd be like, that's a great idea, but maybe don't do that. Mm-hmm. Maybe, what do you think the movie is telling us about why she makes that choice?
So again, I think this is another kind of amazing choice by the director, everybody involved in the creation of this, because so Babette comes from a world where we have some suspicions about the nature of that particular culture. The opera singer Pepin, he says that he is, by the time that he ages, he's forgotten by his fans, just an old man kind of passing into irrelevance. Right. Lawrence kind of talks about that his entire life, which is in this world of kind of culture and whatnot, has all been for vanity's sake. He's very concerned that that's the case. And Babette is of that world. And we learn that because of the general of Lawrence talking about the food that she's made during the dinner. And right. Just about how incredible it is, and how it basically is the milk and honey of that particular class,
right.
of that, so like very over the top kind of place.
It's about creating expensively, meticulously sourced, perfectly prepared culinary works of art for the absolute richest people in the society to enjoy, while meanwhile there are probably people sleeping in the streets in their own filth.
Right. Yeah. And
it's a corrupt world.
It's a corrupt world. Yeah. It's a world not unlike our world. Any world where the forces of capitalism have triumphed. And so there's enough hints that world is not the ideal. In the same way that we get enough hints that the puritanical world is also not the ideal. What I think this movie is sort of trying to get to is the sense that like somewhere in the middle is the right way to be.
Yeah.
And Babette owes her life to these two sisters. She comes, and maybe it's somewhat melodramatic, maybe it's overwrought, maybe it's the director and the novelist poking fun at melodramatic works of fiction that kind of have this. If you've ever seen Love and Death, by Woody Allen's Love and Death, there are these hilarious long stretches where they just talk about wheat. And it's very kind of poking fun at the melodrama of like Russian Russian literature. And I feel like something similar is going on here, though also Babette's Feast could get lumped in with that same kind of somewhat self-important figuring, though I think that the movie is a lot better than that. How I'm trying to answer this question, I promise. Babette owes the sisters her life. We see that early on, where when they first say that they can't take her in, and she says, "There's nothing for me then except death." And they change. They say, "Okay, we don't want that." And she says that she'll work for free. So these sisters have essentially given Babette a life. She is faced with the prospect of returning to that world of culture, and the choice she makes is kind of amazing, where she was like, I'm going to bring that culture here. Mm-hmm. And the marrying of that culture and Babette's desire to repay the debt that she owes the sisters in this puritanical society creates perhaps a new society. And that's why I think that this is essentially a comedy, because comedy is about things going on or moving forward.
Well, so do you think the sisters and Babette are going to be happier than they have been for the rest of their days? Or do you think the night of the feast is a beautiful exception?
Oh, I hope not. Maybe this is a place where you and I flip roles a little bit. Because sometimes I'm making the case for the Jennifer Egan novel, which I love the way that you described it once, where you were like, these are bad people doing bad things, and sometimes I love living in that world. I really hope that this movie is about a new world order that comes from the marrying of two extremes and a more moderate way of looking at things. Though I think it's complicated because, like, at the end of the movie, the shots that we have of Babette, she isn't happy. Like, maybe she is, maybe she's satisfied, but the shots that we see of her after the dinner are a little bit more like a kind of come down.
Spent.
Yeah.
And in order, I think her happiest moment is making the dinner. And I think her happiest moment, weirdly, she never peeks her head in to take in the sight of these Puritans, enjoying the food. And so her most pleasurable moments are when she sips the wine, or when the, I guess, cart driver or the carriage driver kind of comes in and she kind of feeds him sort of the servant's portion, and they have this lovely little, and he is just blown away by the food, and it's part of the comedy that you're talking about. But it also creates this interesting sense of space where one sort of like, probably the kitchen would be the funner place to be than the dining room. Even though profound things are happening in the dining room, to be sure, like you kind of want to hang out with the kitchen with the servants, because they're the ones who are sort of like, they're sipping the wine bottle and they're enjoying everything else, but they also don't have to wear those like, stuffy
straight
clothes
jackets.
and like work on their posture and use their fork the right way. But that's interesting. I feel like if I watch this again, and I think I will, I'm gonna look for clues about the answer to this. And I think part of it is that one of the real questions that would help me answer this is whether the very first scene is set before or after the dinner. And I don't know that that's particularly clear. It's around the time, because the sisters are old, and Babette is about 50, which is what I think she's about 35, 40 when she shows up, and she's about 50 when she cooks the dinner, although she doesn't appear to age.
It's got the same sort of like, maybe this is true, maybe this is not. European films seem to have a looser relationship to verisimilitude than American movies. And maybe that's accurate and maybe that's not.
I took it more that sort of Babette kind of looked like an old 35-year-old and then looks like a young 50-year-old. Because life is not particularly taxing in this place. It might not be very interesting, but it's also not particularly taxing. She can kind of maintain. And there's I also think it's kind of a symbol of her inner vitality. Filmmaking is so much of the film has to be told visually and through acting. And I think the way the characters look and even the way they age is very much part of the story here.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, we get to see these characters. They do a really wonderful job of aging them slightly. And you spend a lot of time wondering, is that the same puritanical woman? And then you think, yes, it is, I think.
Yeah, and I looked up to figure out which, there are young and old version of the sisters and Lawrence too, but I wasn't even sure because the actors really resemble each other. Yeah. Like you could immediately tell, oh, that's old Martine and that's old Philippa and that's old Lawrence. Like it's a wonderful. They do a very good job.
They even do a wonderful double exposure cut of young Martine turning into old Martine.
Yeah.
I was wondering if the actor that played Lawrence was the same, because I was like, God, I guess you could do it with like some hair and some makeup.
His face is so much fleshier. I don't know how you would do that. I know it's possible. They do have the technology, but I don't think so. I think there's well, we could look it up. That would be amazing if that were the case. I don't think so, though, because I looked up the actor who plays the old version of him, and he was in a lot of Ingmar Bergman films in the 50s as a kind of young or middle-aged man. So I don't think he could play the young version.
Yeah. Who do you think the antagonist of this movie is?
I don't think the film has an antagonist. I think that the forces of opposition that stand in our characters' way are contained in each one of them.
I want to hear more about that.
Well, again, we can go back to... You know what? To partly answer your question, I'm going to read you the reading that I wanted to do, because I think it fits. So this is from Anecdotes of Destiny by Karen Blixen, not the screenplay, but this is what it was based on. So... this is the scene where Achille Papin, who is a older, middle-aged opera singer, his career is kind of in decline. He goes to this village. He meets Philippa. She has an absolutely amazing voice. He's going to train her. They're doing a voice lesson, and he's kind of falling in love with her, but he's also dreaming about how she's going to help him revitalize his career. He had never in his life sung as now. In the duet of the second act, which is called the Seduction Duet, he was swept off his feet by the heavenly music and the heavenly voices. As the last melting note died away, he seized Philippa's hands, drew her towards him, and kissed her solemnly. as a bridegroom might kiss his bride before the altar. Then he let her go, for the moment was too sublime for any further word or movement. Mozart himself was looking down on the two. Philippa went home, told her father that she did not want any more singing lessons, and asked him to write and tell Monsieur Papin so. The dean said, "And God's paths run across the rivers, my child." When Achille got Dean's letter, he sat immovable for an hour. He thought, "I have been wrong. My day is over. Never again shall I be the divine Papin, and this poor weedy garden of the world has lost its nightingale." A little later he thought, "I wonder what is the matter with that hussy. Did I kiss her by chance?" In the end he thought, "I have lost my life for a kiss, and I have no remembrance at all of the kiss. Don Giovanni kissed Zerlina, and Achille Papin pays for it. Such is the fate of the artist." In the dean's house, Martine felt that the matter was deeper than it looked, and searched her sister's face. For a moment, slightly trembling, she too imagined that the Roman Catholic gentleman might have tried to kiss Philippa. She did not imagine that her sister might have been surprised and frightened by something in her own nature. Achille Papin took the first boat from Berlevague. Of this visitor from the great world, the sisters spoke but little. They lacked the words in which to discuss him.
The more I talk about this movie, the more I get, the more my fondness for it grows. I watched it last night, and it was quizzical. I've never seen it before. I've of course heard about it. And you're struck with all of the cliches of foreign films. Long shots of landscapes, waves, seagulls, people looking at the waves and the seagulls, lots of costumes, lots of silence.
Tablecloths.
Silverware.
Candles.
And then, I mean, just that passage, like, so much about that passage that you read shuttles back and forth between what the characters know, what they think they know, and what they don't have the capacity to know but feel within themselves. I mean, even the fact, like the word "the sublime" gets brought up in there. The sublime doesn't just mean good; it means so massive that it makes you kind of leap states. Like, the sublime is a place where wild, crazy things happen. And it comes from the fact that, it's sublimation. We're going from one, solid to gas without passing, this total, like, miracle of science. That's what the sublime is in literature. And this movie is so about those particular moments in people's lives when they find themselves in situations that they don't understand, and either making the wrong decision, which I think is what the daughters do early on in life when they don't take up with Pepin or Lawrence. And everybody is kind of given another crack at the apple late in life with Babette.
It's not clear to me that they did make the wrong decision, but it is... I mean, the other thing is, when I saw that scene, I read the scene, I feel like it's pretty faithful. It's not quite exactly. Yeah. In the movie, he actually kisses her on the forehead.
Yeah.
But the spirit, the basic idea...
that scene is hot.
Yeah. And because they're
whoa.
singing in a very flirtatious way, and if you remember, there is a cut to the father, the dean, and Martine sitting there, and they can hear it, and you can tell they're troubled by what they're hearing.
Pardon, c'est toi que j'aime, ton cœur et mon cœur même, et l'amour nous unira. L'amour nous unira. L'amour nous unira.
And to answer your question about the antagonist, I think it would be tempting to see the father as the antagonist because you're right, he doesn't want Philippa to go off with this French opera singer, but I also don't think he would forbid it. I think, you know, if you think about like the Amish tradition and a lot of these kind of strict religions, there is an awareness that we're going to raise you in the way that we think is appropriate, but at a certain point, you're going to need to encounter the world and you're going to need to make your own decision. And my sense of it, it's very quiet, but I think the father is in that mode. So he is afraid she's going to get married, but he's not going, and he's not even necessarily going to share his feelings with her. He shares it with his other sister. Mm-hmm. So maybe he's an antagonist because they're absorbing their values from their father, and he is strict and severe. But at the same time, that sentence... she did not imagine that her sister might have been surprised and frightened by something in her own nature.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the key sentence, right? And I think Philippa gets to decide whether she wants to unlock that part of her nature or not. I also think the ambiguity of the movie is great because there's something just a little lecherous about Papin, too, you know? Yep. And even though she is feeling herself... you know, she's feeling some pleasure and probably some erotic charge in the singing. There's something a little bit creepy about his joy in it as well, even though I think from his perspective as a Frenchman, he's being very restrained and chaste, you know, as a Roman Catholic. And so I don't necessarily feel like any of them are wrong, you know, and I don't think the movie is saying any of them are particularly wrong, although I do think I agree with you that when it comes to the village, over time, the balance gets thrown off, and the austere dominates, and there is a hardening and a bittering. But again, Babette's corrective to this is exactly as you say. It creates a middle path. Yeah. And when the villagers are talking about how much they like the food, and there's this one moment where a particular strict old lady drinks a little bit of the wine, then she drinks some water, and sets it down and drinks more of the wine. Yeah, and there's a number of moments like that where they're all permitting themselves to indulge in more pleasure than they're used to. The way they talk about it is sort of in terms of like, we're getting a glimpse of the afterlife, or we're taking pleasure in the divine. Yeah. You know, God has created this world, and we are experiencing his bounty in a pleasurable way, and they're using their own theology to sort of justify that pleasure, and I think that's sincere. You know, you can love God in a simple life and enjoy the food that you eat, and you can even enjoy sexual congress with the people that you love, and of course that has to happen in this village because there are some kids, right? Or maybe not, I don't know.
Well, there's that wonderful romantic kiss late in the movie. Between
the married couple, old married couple,
and you're not quite sure what the circumstances are. You get the sense from the dialogue,
the marriage has dried up a little bit,
or that there was an infidelity or something.
There was an infidelity,
and I mean, like, the particulars of it don't really matter, and I think that's the thing that we come to learn by the end of it. There's this marvelous scene with two older men who have been just at each other's throats the whole time. And they have this loving, laughing conversation about how they've cheated each other for years. Yeah. And, like, there's kind of this, like, raconteur-esque, like...
And they're both sort of like, and I deserved it.
You got me because I was cheating you also.
You know, there's going to be a really interesting echo of that in Big Night. If you remember, there's that moment that happens, the two men, this is another one of those visual, there's a woman sitting between them, and they kind of lean back in their chairs, and they kind of give each other a side hug behind the woman. And, you know, another example of how this movie is told so much through its sort of placement of the people and the wonderful visuals. But just to wrap up my point, I think I did, but this is why I say I don't think there's an antagonist. I think I think they're all struggling with themselves, and it might be tempting to see the old patriarch as an antagonist, but I don't think that's what's intended.
No, I don't think he's the antagonist any more that Papin could be the antagonist. I think the antagonist in this film is dogmatic thinking.
Right.
Whether that dogmatic thinking is religious or hedonist or political, I think this movie has a real axe to grind about don't get too extreme in anything, and like sense the beauties of the middle path and pull from everything. I think it's a Magpie's kind of philosophy, and I love it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's marvelous in that regard, and it does. My feeling towards the village is not, oh, I don't ever want to go there. It's like I could spend a week there. Yeah. I'd be ready to leave, but
yeah. I mean, especially if we're getting quails and sarcophagi.
Oh yeah, indeed. Incredible. I mean, incredible. Well, so Monica would be happy about this movie, right? Like we get some, we get lots of the scene of Babette and preparing the food, and some of that looks like an oil painting, right? Like the clutches of grapes or the baskets full of quails.
My speculation about the nature of the film is that this is a movie about the separation between the divine and the mundane. And that where it lands is that those things should not be held apart from each other. Mm-hmm. That the divine is right here.
Brilliant, and it relates to, one of those sort of little mini craft talks that we sometimes do. Something I wanted to point out, how you've been talking about the difference between tone and mood, and how one senses irony. We have these little moments. One thing I noticed, obviously with film, you cannot have the character's interiority unless you're going to do voiceover. And most film critics and most filmmakers do not like voiceover. It feels like cheating. There's sometimes maybe where the voiceover is done with such a specific voice, like, say, The Big Lebowski, that it kind of works. And I think it can work in comedy for that reason. So if you don't have interiority, or if you don't have language to express interiority, but you want the audience to understand that your characters are feeling things, and you want them to understand they're feeling things rather deeply, what do you have to work with? And the obvious thing is you have your actors and their ability to portray the emotions on their faces and in their body language and with the blocking. And I would say the actors in this movie do a superb job of all that, because it's very quiet. There are no loud, shouted arguments. There's almost no crying. The emotions are all very quiet, and yet you almost always know what they're feeling, And you also have landscape, and a very interesting choice is one of the very few ways in which this movie departs from the short story is the short story was set in Norway, in a fjord, a village set between two fjords. And I could just imagine the filmmaker, filmmaker is Danish, so that might be why it's in the Jutland of Denmark, as you say, and all the reasons you pointed out earlier, the sort of the yokels, the severity of the landscape. But also it's like that landscape, this place is supposed to stand in for sort of bleak simplicity, and Norway is just too beautiful and too stunning for that. Like the central opposition that you're talking about would just not work as well. We're opposing Paris with this village, and the village has to look severe. And what do? You get a gray ocean with some pebbles, or sea with some pebbles, and there are some kind of distant grayish yellow green hills that look like they might, you could probably have one nice walk in them before you got bored of them. It's not, it's a little bit of a bleak landscape. And then the other thing you have is your editing. You have lots of tools, but one of the things you have is your editing and your cuts. And I think that's one of the tools I was noticing that this movie uses masterfully, and particularly in the preparation scene. Have you ever heard the term smash, a smash edit?
I know what a smash cut is.
Right, same idea, smash cut. So a smash cut is a particularly abrupt cut. Screenwriters sometimes use it, and it's often when you're cutting kind of in the middle of action in a way that feels abrupt to the audience, and then you're thrown right into the middle of something else that feels very different. Apparently, one version of this is apparently called the Gilligan cut, because on Gilligan's Island, you'd often have a character saying like, I would never try to guess what's in the Christmas presents before Christmas, and then cut to that person doing that exact thing.
The skipper is like opening the Christmas present, like tucking up one piece of the wrapping.
Exactly. So that's a version, but there were a number of smash edits in this that are designed to exactly reveal, I think, the opposition you're talking about. And particularly, there's all these moments where Martine or Philippa are spying on Babette as she's cooking the meal, and you see these like the wine coming and the gasping turtle is a particular moment, and the one where, and we talked about this imagery that's almost like a witch's brew. The one moment that had just this really, really powerful smash is that moment where Martine assembles everybody and they're making the agreement that they're basically not going to enjoy the dinner. They're going to be polite, and then they gather around and they sing, not very beautifully, this sort of boring religious hymn, and smash cut to like the cow's head and the chicken's feet in the wheelbarrow getting rolled away.
Som vi aldrig havde fået evnen til at smage.
En eneste sejltur omsorgsfulde for dit daglige brød og glæde. Guld og stene, ej du rækker til det barn, der bad om brød.
It's just driving home that point that in Martine's world and amongst the disciples, this thing is going on, and in Babette's world, this thing is going on. Yeah. And we have not yet brought them together. And in the end of the film, we bring them together in a very happy way. So it's a quiet movie, but in a quiet movie, little choices like that can go a long way.
Yeah, it really makes a case against the bombast of a lot of more contemporary movie making, and it doesn't have to be contemporary. I mean, Cecil DeMille is the
sure.
the opposite, in previous times. But
I agree. I don't think you see this kind of quiet storytelling in contemporary Hollywood movies very often. I was actually going to ask you if you could think of any in the next, like in the last 10 or 15 years.
10 or 15, no, but Stellan Skarsgård, he's young. It's probably late 90s. He's paralyzed in a mining accident. God, what the heck is the name of that movie?
You're not talking about the diving bell and the butterfly, are you? That's not Stellan Skarsgård, though.
Shoot. It is very sad and very quiet, and might not be indicative of current Hollywood, but it did rise to the level. It was a well-known Hollywood movie. Maybe it'll come back.
Stellan Skarsgård was young. Isn't he like in his 70s by now?
Yeah, it's a late 90s movie. I don't know. I'm gonna. I'll see if I can pick it up.
The Tender Mercies is a good example. A River Runs Through It. That's from the 90s. The only one I could think of in the last few years was Minari. Did you see that?
I did not see that. No.
That is, I think it's a American production, but it's Korean. The actors are speaking Korean for the most part to each other, although also English too. It stars Stephen Yeun. And it had a
Breaking the
wonderful...
Waves. Breaking the Waves.
Breaking the Waves.
Yes.
Breaking the Waves.
Yeah.
I remember that. I don't think I've ever seen it. But Minari came out just in, I think, 2019 or 2020. And that's the only thing I could think of. And it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's a similar kind of story. It's a story about dreams deferred. And it's a family drama. I'll look it up real quickly, get the director's name.
Beau Travail, but again, that's like early aughts. It's Claire Denis. It's about as French as they come, but in terms of its quietude and volume. I mean, that's one of my favorite movies of all time. But I mean, it felt like, I think the reason I'm loving it so much is it felt like the complications of a Chekhov play. Years and years and years ago, when I was still like studying theater, one of the like acting classes I was in, we were all doing Chekhov's scene study because that's what you do. And there was a scene that wasn't working. And the guy who was running the class was like, I'm going to try something. And he asked one of the other students, like, hey, while they're doing this scene, I want you to be the maid. And it like there's a maid in the scene. She doesn't have any lines, but it's written into the script that the maid comes in and like straightens a picture. And I think it's in The Three Sisters. And what's happening is one of the sisters is talking with one of the soldiers, and they're like a lot of Chekhov. Maybe they're going to fall in love, but probably their lives are going to be ruined. And the two of them, and adding that maid to the scene, all of a sudden made the two actors who were playing the scene have to like talk quite a bit more quietly.
Interesting.
And holy crap.
Yeah.
Like it just came to life. And I just feel like that's what this movie is doing. And it's so tasteful, and so much is happening while it looks like so little is happening. And it's I've known about this movie forever because you don't operate in like books and movies and stuff like that without hearing about what a great movie Babette's Feast is. And then you see it and you're like, okay, yeah, it's great.
I just thought of a new wrap-up question for us, which could be, we could certainly answer the question, will you watch this again? But also, did it meet expectations?
This exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, I would say me too, although one thing, I would say on the whole, it exceeded my expectations, although I will say, in the way that it had been talked up, I expected the sort of ecstasy of the feast to be even grander. Like I was imagining, like the Lawrence and Martine like taking a long walk on the beach and kissing. I kind of thought it was going to go a little bit bigger than it actually went.
I'm so glad it didn't.
Do you have trivia?
I do.
Okay,
I
let's
think
do trivia.
This is going to be a shoe-in for you, I think, because it sounds like from what the research you've done, I think you're going to get this in like without me even needing to finish the question. So, Babette's Feast is based on a novella by Karen Blixen. I can't pronounce her final name. Finnica, I would guess.
I don't know. I mean, also
anyway.
Sometimes known as Isaac Dennison.
Yes, also published under the pen name Isaac Dennison. Later, Blixen was played by what great dame of cinema?
Meryl
Was
Streep.
it A? Excellent. Correct. Say your answer again for the listeners.
Meryl Streep. Sorry, do you want to give me the choices?
No. I threw Sigourney Weaver and Dame Judi Dench in there, which
They all could have done it.
They all could have done it.
I actually happen to have seen an interview from years ago where Meryl Streep was talking about being cast in that role, and she sort of hilariously said that, you know, because she's beautiful, but I don't know that she was thought of as sexy. And so apparently, for whatever reason, she wore a push-up bra because she had heard maybe the director had expressed concerns that she wouldn't be able to quite live up to the sensuality of the role. So she that was her audition solution to that.
That is awesome. That's such a Meryl Streep kind of story. You
Yeah.
can imagine her telling that story, you know, too, about being like, well, you know, like nobody's ever described me as sexy before.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
you know,
At a dinner party in Manhattan, she would tell
Totally,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like an entire generation of men and women are like, Meryl Streep, you're quite sexy.
Indeed. And really cool.
Oh my God.
And a total badass actor. I'm afraid mine is a little bit harder,
Yours
unfortunately.
are always harder than mine.
I hope I'm not overdoing it. I try to make them gettable.
I think it's good. I like the dichotomy we're evolving.
I mean, I feel like maybe yours need to be a little harder for me. But okay, so mine is about the real Café Anglais, which is a real restaurant.
Yep.
And it was named after a treaty between France and England in the early 1800s. Mm-hmm. The real chef, as far as I could tell, they never had a woman chef. The real chef was Adolphe Dugaret. And it was though very much the way the general describes it in that sort of last little toast scene. So, which of the following is a real menu item prepared at the Café Anglais? A. Potage de banque, which was dedicated to the head of the National Bank of France. B. Pomme aux boulettes de mouton. C. The Three Emperors' Dinner, which was a meal prepared for 3 European monarchs. Or D. Le pain pour un sautant monsieur Nivin. Following my rule about when I get to use a D.
Can you translate item D for me?
Rabbit for a certain Mr. Niven.
I was wondering if you had somehow wrapped a ring into that somehow. Okay,
that would have been good. I did not.
Potage de banque. Give me the second one.
Pomme au boulet de mouton. If you want, I'll translate it.
I mean, that's like apples. It's like a round apple of mutton.
Well, keep in mind that often pomme is a shortening of pomme de terre.
Potato, yeah. We're doing, I mean, apples of the earth.
We don't say pomme de terre frites. We say pomme frites.
Pomme frites. And what was C?
The Three Emperors' Dinner.
I'm gonna go with B.
Let me give you the translation. Potatoes with balls of sheep.
Yeah, that sounds like I've had so many French meals that are like the translation is something like that. You're like, ooh, that sounds romantic. And then you change it and you're like, oh my God.
Another translation would be potatoes with sheep balls. The correct answer is the Three Emperors' Dinner, which was a 9,000 franc meal prepared for 3 European monarchs, including Alexander II of Russia and one of the Bismarcks and someone else. It was a meal that sounds quite a bit like the one that Babette prepared. In fact, maybe even was the inspiration, particularly if you factor in
the price tag.
The price tag.
Yeah.
So honestly, calling the meal potatoes with sheep balls was my attempt to make it a little bit easier for you to do a little bit of sleuthing.
Well, I mean, the reason I went with that is like French culinary names have this hilarious,
right?
Like,
no, it could be. You could imagine like taking mutton, mincing it with some spices, putting it into a baller, and then putting it in like the sarcophagi like dumplings that the quail were cooked in.
Yeah, so, I mean the literal translation of Kyle and sarcophaga is like quail coffins.
Right.
Right. It's really I mean that's the thing about French cooking that everybody forgets is that like at its nature, it is a peasant food that has been, taken. It's like if you took the hamburger and gave it to like Wiley Dufresne or something.
We in America, the hamburger has been elevated to that.
The Three Emperors sounded too implausible for the mid-19th century Europe to me.
Well, you keep in mind back then that a lot of people who we would probably just refer to as kings now referred to themselves as emperors back then. Because think about the size of European principalities. Man, it's like you control like the Rhineland and like Luxembourg and Belgium. You're an emperor. Like that's 3 countries. They're countries. I mean, how many languages are there in mainland Europe? Like 92?
So many. Yeah.
Each one of those counts as a kingdom. So basically, if you conquer like 3 of them, you're an emperor.
You're an emperor.
Yeah.
So I mean, like what we call Germany was like 600 principalities for the longest time.
Exactly. Yes. In fact, basically the guy who was the king of Germany was the emperor. I forget. I could look up who that guy actually was, but he was one of them, and I believe the French monarch at the time was, or it might have been Napoleon III, and then Alexander of Russia They had conquered Lithuania or Estonia or something like that, and Siberia. So he got to be an emperor. Everybody got to be an emperor back then.
And then everybody got to eat at the Café Anglais.
But yeah, indeed. And by 1977, to be an emperor, you had to have conquered the entire galaxy. And so I think maybe you and I have a pretty big idea of what an emperor is. We're like, an emperor? If he doesn't control all the planets, he's not an emperor. He's merely
right. Yeah, if he's not the emperor, if he's not Palpatine.
A moth. Yeah.
Next up, listeners, we are going to be watching The Cook, The Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, directed by Peter Greenaway, is what we have on tap.
And we have heard that there may be some difficulty in obtaining that. So I suggest you check your local library and you check if you're a person who's lucky to have a DVD rental store, check there. If those fail, send us an email at hello@uppermiddlebrow.com. It's possible we might be able to be helpful in this quest. And I'll say no more.
Well, you will say the credits.
I will say the credits. Upper Middle Brow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the porters, busboys, barbacks, and stars of the dish pit. I almost said of this dipshit. That's probably old. This is probably
This is old. This is the same outro from our chewing episode. So
we're not Babette. So she's got the table waiter, and she's got the
we are Eric and the cart driver.
Jesse Dukes and Chris Bagg are Eric, the waiter, and the cart driver, sipping and enjoying our family meal while Babette slaves away. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. You can learn more about us at uppermiddlebrow.com. The other thing you can do at uppermiddlebrow.com is find a link to our listener survey and fill it out. And if you want, we'll enter you into a drawing to win a storied Bluetooth speaker, which is perfect for listening to Upper Middle Brow. So go to uppermiddlebrow.com for the link to the survey. We really would like you to do that. And if you think we ramble too much, this is your chance to tell us that. This is your chance to have
your
impact
chance.
In how
Remember, it's all essentially ramble, so be careful of what you ask us to cut. But go ahead, tell us.
We could ramble. It could be a shorter ramble. It could be a longer ramble. Yeah, that is an option.
As a reminder, everybody, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing projects. You can see our portfolios and learn more at our websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Check them out and get in touch if you want to talk about how we can help you with your project, big or small. The last thing I want to say about Babette's Feast was, did you think that, in fact, this entire dinner was going to be derailed by the cart driver drinking all the wine while Babette was cooking the meal?
I had anxiety that he was going to drink the really expensive vintage, or he was going to upset the fire and there'd be a fire in the kitchen or something like that, which is what would have happened in an American movie.
I know, totally.
Movie. It would have been okay, but the guests would have had to come in and and then they would have had to start the dinner and they'd do it at someone else's house, and they would have all come together. But nope. It was just, he was just enjoying his wine.
Yeah, he merely had a wonderful evening.
Yes, as did we all.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, one more thing before we go. I just want to remind you that the next film is The Cook, The Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, directed by Peter Greenaway. And it is hard to find. I don't think it's streaming in North America. There are some DVDs available on the used markets in places like eBay. Your library might have it. You might be able to get an interlibrary loan. Maybe you have a video store that will have it. If you absolutely can't find it and you want to watch it, send an email to hello@uppermiddlebrow.com and we might have a suggestion. We might be able to help. The other thing about the movie is it has very explicit and disturbing violence, including domestic violence, and it has very explicit sex and nudity. I would probably not watch it with a kid, and you might want to consider whether you are okay viewing it. We totally get if you need to skip that one, but if you can handle the sex and violence, we think it is worth watching. It's pretty incredible. It's worth talking about. It's worth thinking about. So thank you for listening, and we hope we'll see you soon.